There is a moment in almost every relationship when you have to stop and ask yourself a difficult question. Am I being valued, or am I simply trying to convince someone to value me? This distinction is more important than it appears. When someone repeatedly ignores you, the instinct is often to increase your effort. You send another message. You explain yourself. You ask what went wrong. You become more available. You try to prove that you are worth their attention. And psychologically, this is where the balance of power begins to shift against you. The more desperately you pursue someone's attention, the more you communicate that their attention has become more valuable to you than your own dignity. That does not mean you should become cold, arrogant, or deliberately cruel. It means you must recognize the difference between genuine connection and emotional dependence. There is nothing wrong with reaching out to someone you care about. There is nothing wrong with making an effort. The problem begins when the effort becomes one-sided and you continue giving despite receiving clear evidence that the other person is not interested in reciprocating. Think about what happens psychologically when you constantly chase. Your attention becomes predictable. Your availability becomes guaranteed. The other person no longer has to wonder whether you will be there because you have already demonstrated that you will continue pursuing them regardless of how little they give back. And once someone realizes they can receive your attention without earning it, they may stop appreciating it. This is why withdrawal can be powerful, not as a trick, not as a manipulation, but as a form of clarity. When you stop chasing, you create a space in which reality can reveal itself. If the person genuinely cares about you, they now have the opportunity to step forward. If they do nothing, you have received an answer without having to beg for it. That answer may hurt, but uncertainty often hurts more. One of the hardest lessons in human relationships is accepting that you cannot persuade someone into genuine interest. You cannot argue someone into caring. You cannot perform enough favors, send enough messages, or offer enough affection to manufacture authentic respect. And this is where self-respect begins. Self-respect is not loudly announcing that you are valuable. It is quietly refusing to participate in situations that repeatedly convince you that you are not. When you stop chasing, you are not saying, "You are beneath me." You are saying, "I will no longer abandon myself just to maintain access to you." That distinction changes everything. Your attention is a form of psychological currency. Spend it where there is reciprocity. Give it to people who recognize it. Give it to your ambitions, your discipline, your relationships, and the life you are building. Because the strongest person in the room is not always the one who commands attention. Sometimes it is the person who can walk away when attention is no longer freely given. Stop begging someone to recognize your value. If you have to chase respect, it is already costing you too much. Once you stop begging for someone's attention, you begin to understand another powerful principle of human psychology. Scarcity changes perception. We tend to notice what is constantly available less than what can suddenly disappear. This does not mean people are simple creatures who only value what they cannot have. It means that familiarity can reduce awareness. When something is always present, the mind can begin to treat it as part of the background. Your messages, your compliments, your availability, your emotional support, all of these can become expected rather than appreciated. And this is where many people make a serious mistake. They believe that giving more will finally make someone value them more. So they increase their effort, more messages, more attention, more explanations, more attempts to repair the connection. But instead of increasing attraction or respect, excessive availability can sometimes produce the opposite effect. The other person has no opportunity to experience your absence because you never allow yourself to become absent. Think about the psychological difference between someone who is always asking for your attention and someone who has a full life of their own. The first person communicates, consciously or unconsciously, "I need you to make me feel important." The second communicates something very different. "I enjoy your presence, but my life does not collapse without it." That difference is enormous. True scarcity is not manufactured through games. It comes naturally from having priorities. You are not pretending to be busy. You are actually building something. You are not delaying a response to create anxiety. You simply do not organize your entire existence around another person's availability. This is why pulling back can be so revealing. When you stop initiating constantly, you learn who was genuinely interested in you and who was merely comfortable receiving your attention. When you stop filling every silence, you discover whether the other person will make an effort to close the distance. When you stop constantly explaining yourself, you learn whether they are capable of understanding you without being persuaded. Silence creates information, and information is one of the most valuable forms of power in human relationships. You cannot see someone's true level of interest while you are constantly compensating for their lack of effort. Your actions are covering up the evidence. But when you step back, the relationship has to stand on its own. This is not about making someone panic. It is not about creating jealousy. It is not about disappearing for 3 days because some strategy told you that absence will make someone obsessed with you. Those are games, and games eventually expose insecurity. The deeper principle is much simpler. Stop over-investing where there is no reciprocity. Let people experience the natural consequences of your absence. If your presence mattered, they will notice. If they valued the connection, they will participate in maintaining it. And if they do nothing, you have learned something that chasing them could never teach you. There is also a philosophical lesson here. You cannot force another person to choose you. You can only choose how you respond to their choices. So stop trying to manipulate the outcome. Stop measuring your worth by how quickly someone responds. Stop believing that their attention is proof of your value. Build a life so meaningful that your attention becomes something you give consciously, not something you desperately distribute. Because sometimes the greatest revelation does not come from getting someone to chase you. It comes from realizing, asterisk, you no longer need to be chased at all. Asterisk, and once you begin to recognize the power of scarcity, you encounter an even more difficult lesson. Persistence is not always strength. We are taught from an early age that persistence is admirable. Never give up. Keep trying. Fight for what you want. And in many areas of life, this is excellent advice. But relationships require another kind of intelligence. There comes a point where persistence stops being courage and becomes self-disrespect. The difference is reciprocity. If you make an effort and the other person responds with effort, there is something worth building. If you communicate openly, and they communicate openly, persistence can strengthen the connection. But when you are repeatedly ignored, dismissed, or treated as an option, continuing to pursue the same person does not demonstrate strength. It demonstrates that you are willing to disregard evidence because you are emotionally attached to an outcome. And this is where people become trapped. They become attached not to the person as they actually are, but to the person they imagine that person could become. They remember the good conversations, the moments of affection, the promises, the potential. Then they use those memories as justification for tolerating the present. But human beings reveal themselves through patterns. One unanswered message means very little. A difficult week means very little. People become busy, distracted, overwhelmed, and imperfect. But when the same behavior repeats again and again, you have to stop interpreting isolated incidents and start examining the pattern. Are you always initiating? Are you always apologizing? Are you always repairing the relationship? Are you constantly wondering where you stand while the other person seems perfectly comfortable, leaving you uncertain? If the answer is yes, then the problem is no longer simply that they are ignoring you. The deeper problem is that you are participating in a relationship where your effort has become disconnected from your self-respect. This is why boundaries are so important. A boundary is not a threat. It is not, treat me this way or I will punish you. A boundary is a decision about what you will and will not continue participating in. You can care about someone and still stop chasing them. You can miss someone and still refuse to beg for their attention. You can love someone and still recognize that the relationship is unhealthy for you. That is emotional maturity. The strongest form of persistence is sometimes knowing when not to persist. There is wisdom in recognizing that certain doors should be knocked on once, perhaps twice, but not forever, because every time you chase someone who has clearly chosen distance, you teach yourself a dangerous lesson, that your own needs are less important than keeping another person. Eventually, that lesson becomes a habit, and habits shape identity. You begin accepting less. You become afraid of being alone. You start believing that losing someone is worse than losing yourself. But the opposite is true. Losing someone's attention may create temporary pain. Losing your standards can create years of it. So ask yourself a different question. Don't ask, how can I make them stay? Ask, what is their behavior teaching me about where I stand? That question shifts you from desperation to observation, from emotional reaction to strategic thinking, from chasing an outcome to understanding reality. You do not need to punish anyone. You do not need revenge. You simply need the courage to stop investing where there is no return. Because persistence is powerful only when it serves your purpose. Asterisk, never be so determined to keep someone that you become determined to lose yourself. And once you understand that persistence has limits, you arrive at another important distinction. Silence can either be an act of self-respect or an act of manipulation. The difference lies in your intention. There is a kind of silence that comes from insecurity. You stop responding because you want the other person to panic. You disappear because you want them to wonder where you are. You post something designed to make them jealous. You deliberately delay your response because you want to regain control. This may feel powerful for a moment, but it is still dependence. You are technically silent, but psychologically you are still chasing them. Your attention remains fixed on their reaction. You are thinking, did they notice? Are they worried? Will they message me now? That is not freedom. That is simply chasing from a distance. Real silence is different. Real silence does not demand a reaction. It is the quiet decision to stop forcing what cannot be forced. You stop explaining yourself to someone who has already demonstrated that they are unwilling to listen. You stop sending messages into an empty space. You stop repeatedly asking for clarity from someone who benefits from keeping you uncertain. And most importantly, you stop using silence as a weapon. You use it as a boundary. There is enormous psychological strength in understanding that you do not have to respond to every provocation, every rejection, every delayed message, or every confusing behavior. Not every situation deserves your emotional energy. Sometimes the most intelligent response is simply to observe. Watch what people do when you stop doing everything for them. If you always initiate the conversation, stop initiating for a while. Not as a test, but because you need to see whether the relationship has mutual energy. If you are always solving the conflict, step back and allow the other person to take responsibility. If you are always explaining your feelings, stop trying to convince someone who has already heard you, then observe. Observation reveals what emotional desperation often hides. You may discover that the person reaches out because they genuinely care. You may discover that they recognize your absence and make an effort. Or, you may discover something much more painful. Nothing changes. But even that is valuable information, because clarity is often more valuable than temporary comfort. Many people remain trapped in unhealthy relationships because they are afraid of what silence will reveal. They keep talking, texting, explaining, and repairing, because as long as they are actively doing something, they can avoid confronting the possibility that the other person simply does not care enough. But silence removes the illusion of control. It forces reality to speak. And there is a philosophical lesson here. You cannot control another person's feelings, decisions, or level of commitment. You can only control your own participation. That is where your power begins. So do not withdraw to make someone miss you. Withdraw because you refuse to be treated as an option. Do not become silent because you want revenge. Become silent because you have said what needed to be said. There is dignity in knowing when the conversation is over. And when you reach that point, you no longer need to announce your departure, prove your importance, or demand recognition. You simply step back and allow people to reveal themselves. Because sometimes silence is not about making someone hear you, it is about finally hearing yourself. And once you learn to step back, without using silence as a weapon, something even more important begins to happen. You start reclaiming your attention. This may sound simple, but attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Wherever your attention goes, your emotional energy follows. And if you spend hours wondering why someone has not replied, checking whether they are online, rereading old conversations, analyzing their social media activity, or imagining what they might be thinking, then that person has acquired influence over your inner world without having to do anything at all. They may not even realize it. You have simply handed them the controls. This is one of the hidden costs of chasing someone who ignores you. The obvious cost is rejection. The deeper cost is distraction. You stop focusing on your own life because your mind becomes occupied with someone else's behavior. You wake up thinking about them. You go to sleep thinking about them. You check your phone hoping for their name. And when the message does not come, your mood changes. Now consider what has happened. Someone who may barely be participating in your life has become one of the most influential forces in your emotional life. That is a dangerous imbalance. Your attention should be an instrument you control, not something other people can pull around whenever they choose. This is why the solution is not simply to stop texting. You have to replace the psychological space that chasing occupied. Otherwise, you may stop contacting them while continuing to obsess over them internally. That is not real detachment. Real detachment means redirecting your energy towards something constructive. Return to your goals, improve your skills, strengthen your body, read, build something, spend time with people who genuinely value your presence. Develop interests that existed before this person entered your life. The objective is not to make yourself so busy that you forget them. The objective is to make your own life important enough that one person's attention is no longer capable of defining your emotional state. There is a profound difference between having someone in your life and making someone the center of your life. Healthy relationships add meaning to your existence. They do not replace it. And this is where self-mastery enters the picture. If you cannot control where your mind goes, then anyone who captures your attention can influence you. But when you learn to redirect your attention deliberately, you become psychologically harder to manipulate. You begin asking better questions. Instead of, "Why don't they want me?" you ask, "What do I want from my life?" Instead of, "Why haven't they responded?" you ask, "What deserves my attention right now?" Instead of, "How can I make them realize my worth?" you ask, "How can I live in a way that makes their approval unnecessary?" Those questions transform your position. You stop trying to win someone else's attention and start investing in your own development. And paradoxically, this is often when people become more attractive, not because they are pretending not to care, but because they have stopped making another person's response the measure of their identity. There is a quiet confidence that comes from having somewhere meaningful to go. You don't need to chase every person who walks away because you are already walking towards something. So, reclaim your attention. Protect it. Invest it carefully. Because your life is ultimately shaped by what you repeatedly give your mind, your energy, and your time to. Asterisk, stop spending your life watching someone who refuses to notice you and start building a life you cannot afford to ignore. And after you reclaim your attention, you eventually arrive at the final test. Can you walk away without needing the other person to regret losing you? This is where many people fail. They stop chasing physically, but they continue chasing psychologically. They want the other person to come back. They want an apology. They want a message saying, "I made a mistake." They want to see jealousy, regret, or desperation. They imagine the day when the person finally realizes what they lost. But if your happiness depends on that moment, you have not truly walked away. You are still waiting for them to give you the validation you claimed you no longer needed. Real strength is quieter. It does not require revenge. It does not require dramatic announcements. It does not require posting carefully calculated images to prove that you are doing better. It does not require making someone jealous or trying to make them suffer. You simply accept what their behavior has shown you. This is difficult because the human ego wants closure. It wants the story to end with justice. It wants the person who ignored you to eventually recognize your value. But life does not always provide that ending. Sometimes people leave without understanding what they lost. Sometimes they never apologize. Sometimes they move on completely. And you have to become comfortable with that possibility, because your value cannot depend on another person's ability to recognize it. Think about how much freedom exists in that idea. If someone respects you, you appreciate it. If someone loves you, you appreciate it. If someone chooses to leave, you accept it. None of these outcomes determines your fundamental worth. Your responsibility is not to control the verdict other people give you. Your responsibility is to live according to standards you can respect. This is why walking away is not necessarily an act of defeat. Sometimes it is an act of accurate perception. You have gathered the evidence. You have communicated. You have made an effort. You have given the relationship a reasonable opportunity to develop. And now you recognize that continuing would require you to sacrifice more of yourself than the relationship can return. So you leave, not because you hate them, because you refuse to hate yourself. There is an important distinction here. Walking away does not mean becoming emotionally numb. You can still miss someone. You can still feel disappointed. You can still remember the good moments. Strength does not mean feeling nothing. Strength means feeling those emotions without allowing them to dictate your behavior. You can experience loss without chasing what has already left. You can experience loneliness without returning to someone who repeatedly made you feel unwanted. You can experience rejection without turning rejection into a judgment about your identity. And eventually, something changes inside you. You stop asking, "How do I make them choose me?" You begin asking, "Why was I so determined to be chosen by someone who could not see my value?" That question marks a turning point, because the goal was never to make another person regret losing you. The goal was to become someone who no longer needs their regret. So if someone ignores you, don't immediately chase. Observe. If someone repeatedly gives you less than you give them, don't endlessly negotiate. Step back. If someone chooses distance, don't spend your life trying to close it. Respect their choice and make your own. Choose your dignity. Choose your peace. Choose your future. And above all, choose yourself without needing anyone else to lose you first. Asterisk. The greatest victory is not making someone regret walking away. It is reaching the point where you no longer care whether they do. Asterisk.